darkness is far more ancient than them. We need to help each other, Woven and elf, to fight our common threat.
Before we get into that, I'd just like to thank Ikes, as usual, for putting on another marvelous launch, for supporting local literature, local artists, local culture, and I think it's always great to see such a wonderful turnout for these events. Also like to thank Rowan for providing the marvelous grub, Issy for doing some camera work here, and just the Ikes team for putting together another great event. Tonight we'll be talking to scriptwriter, director, and author Dayakar Padayachee, who is launching his epic fantasy tale, The Ancient Scrolls of Lukutona. Let's get a little round of applause for everybody involved. Okay. Dayakar, I know you've been working on this book for quite some time, and it's a labor of love. I also know what a rewarding experience it is to hold one's debut novel, the first crisp copy in your hand, printed. Can you tell us a bit about where it all started with the world of Lukutona? How and when you conceived the idea, and maybe some of the inspiration behind it?
Sure, thank you so much guys for coming. I've always been coming to Ike's book launches for about a year now, and you know, there's something amazing about this place which just resonates with an old sort of mindset, an old spirit of people who just still appreciate books and reading. And I just want to spread my love to Joe for hosting us this evening, to Cedric Sissing, who's not here. I hope he gets well. To Colin McGee, who is an absolute legend of notes. To Rob, I love you, man. Thank you so much for being the family that Ike's needs. To people in Durban who can just appreciate literature. And that being said, to answer your question, so I started off in film, as Luke has kind of, branched into, and I had this concept of Lukutona lying around in my head since the age of 13. And in school, while I should be listening to the teachers and doing my work, I was drawing comics and exercise books, and it was about Lukutona, funny enough. At that point in time, it was kind of just a little bit of a rip-off of Narnia, kind of influences of Harry Potter, influences of Lord of the Rings. There was no Game of Thrones at that time. But over time, I remember the characters, the names, and the world itself remained. It became something that was still so completely new, even though the storytelling was a bit of a fan fiction of note, right? So in 2015, actually in 2014, one of my friends, Tyson Morrigan, he's no longer here with us. He had introduced me to a friend named Edgar Roshef. And Ed was this Siberian Russian dude who was really into martial arts. And my friend Tyson was a martial artist who trained for stunts in film, and Ed would be part of the workshops and trainings that he used to do. So we met up, we chatted. He was like, "What else do you have, man?" We spoke about something called the Cobra, which was a superhero concept that I tried to do back then. And then I told him the other concept that I had was Lukutona. And he took a liking to the dwarves in the world, because the dwarves, specifically a character named Baruf, who features in this book, and his culture, was something that I was trying to find a way of not being Tolkien, because I think Tolkien, he was obsessed with the Nord and the Scottish culture of myth and folklore that obviously were more applicable to the characters of the dwarves in Lord of the Rings. So for me, Lukutona was always something that needed to be, as my friend Sanam and I always used to talk about, the opposite of Tolkien, or the anti-Tolkien. And his culture of Siberia and that Russian Muslim aspect became something that was very, very foundational to the dwarves in Lukutona. So for me, that actually became a massive inspiration to the rest of the characters within Lukutona, where I started to look into what makes fantasy interesting. Fantasy can generally be a generic genre where it starts off as dragons and magic, wizards, whatnot, right? However, if we speak within the stance of allegory, then we are reaching into something that is far more interesting. Because allegory is on the basis of realism and history, right? We are, I think in this day and age, we are dealing with one of the most darkest times in political history, and people all over the world, through Palestine to Congo, to Bangladesh, to Sudan, are suffering. And these are some horror stories that we see. And I think one of the most excellent vehicles of fantasy is to escape. Thank you very much for that. And as a fan of fiction, I think it's important for us to not get stuck in the idea of fantasy. We always see it as the scary concept of, it's just this unreal world. It's just, I can't really relate. And I don't think that's true. Because if we go back in time and we look into some of the greatest in fantasy, we look at Robert Johnson, we look at Tolkien, we look at even now George R. R. Martin. I'm not going to reference the other name, Harry Potter, but that's all I'm going to say. And we look into these elements about what makes these fantasy stories so relatable just to kids or even adults, and it's the human story. And I think, Luke, you and I have had conversations ad nauseum about, even while I was writing this book, about the nature of humanity that needs to be cultivated within storytelling. And I hope and I pray that Lukutona maintains that nature of storytelling, of humanity, because that's the most important thing.
I agree. I mean, I've said before, and I believe no matter what genre you're working in, whether it be fantasy, sci-fi, horror, rom-com, the most powerful way of using that genre is as a framework to tell human stories. You speak about allegory. I agree with that. I think allegory works within every genre if you understand that you're telling human stories. And fantasy, the tropes, the archetypes, they all work if you understand how to use them. And that leads me on to my next question. As a writer, I'm always curious about the creative process of other storytellers, how they actually bring a story to life in their own minds before they put it on the page or the screen. For me personally, I'm also a writer and an artist. I make comic books. You can get some of them at the front, but without hijacking my friend's launch. For me personally, I often find creation starts with the characters themselves, their motivations, their relationships, their drives, their fears, and they sort of tell me what world they want to live in and what kind of story they want to inhabit. The Ancient Scrolls of Lukutona is a sprawling narrative spanning years across kingdoms with a massive cast of characters. So what I'd like to know, Dayakar, is where you start as a writer to create your story. Characters, the plot itself, the world, a message you want the story to convey, maybe just an image or even a name. Where do you begin?
Yeah, so Lukutona, I actually have no idea where I came with that name, but I always remember as a kid at the age of 13, in school, St. Henry's Morris Brothers, that's where I came from. I do remember a friend asking me, what does Lukutona mean? And I think maybe I thumbsucked this answer, but I use thumbsuck a lot, but
it's named after me, Luke, right?
No. But Lukutona means look and you shall see. And how did I get to that? Because one of my friends who's now no longer with us as well, Matthew Allen, in school during art class, one of the teachers, Mr. Eager, had asked about the nature of art. And I had said that, I put up my hand, and I said, well, sir, I think the importance of art is that, you know, the eye triggers the mind. And everybody started laughing. You know, they all thought that was a completely foolish answer. But the one person who remembered that as something that was quite profound was Matthew Allen. And there was a recent article about the nature of how we see and what we process as information of art. And it boiled down to the eye triggers the mind. Right? So what you see is then what you feel. It's look and you shall see. Lukutona is the nature of a world beyond. It's an alternate dimension from our own elf-bound realm. So it's a space where imagination and cultures that came before colonial control existed. And if you look at cultures before that, they had defined the natures of technology, of language, of culture, of religion, everything way before the Anglo-Saxons or Portuguese or Dominican or whatever you want to talk about, who had come and colonized. So when we look at language, when we look at culture, when we look at art, when we look at history, when we look at just what we are as human beings today, we must go back to the culture that was prehistoric to our own timeline. And I feel like what I was trying to do with Lukutona is that it goes back to those ancient cultures. It starts looking at them where we can be redefined today. And what's the better spot to do that through the lens of fiction? Yeah, so I think just in terms of the backdrop, Lukutona was on that lens spectrum, but then it was also other things. As an Indian person, as someone who comes from a Hindu culture, somebody who has grown up understanding who unfortunately I've never met my grandfathers, but I appreciate them as pundits, as people who had profound knowledge and information about where we came from and who we were. And I think the most important thing to know is that our culture determines our destination. It helps us find some form of realization of who we are. And yeah, I think that's what I was trying to do with the characters in Lukutona. So for example, the Tarasinians, who are the elf stronghold in Lukutona, they represent a allegorical nature of the Dwarves, an ancient civilization of Tamil descent, and they speak Tamil. So in the book, I was like, I'm not going to be like Tolkien and sit there and adapt Welsh into a language that now does not exist, which you can probably learn on Duolingo, but it's whatever. But I was like, no, why is there no Tamil in fiction? Let's bring that back. Let's do that, right? So the elves speak Tamil. There are some words in the book, in the phonetic, that people speak in full-blown Tamil. The dwarves, for example, they speak Old Turk. I had to go back and research and look into Old Turkish language and actually see how this would work into the book. But if I look at it, it kind of fits. There's an Nguni tribe, but because they belong within the world of Lukutona, they don't really subscribe to every Nguni language. So having that language within the book wouldn't really be respectful. So I thought, okay, at that point, I'm going to have to try and adapt. But they still represent all of the Nguni tribes. They're wizards with knobkerries. They wear togas. They live in a cantonment with beehive huts, which is completely representable of the Nguni tribe. So these were some of the elements that I was like, okay, you know what, as a South African, as an Indian person, how am I going to represent these characters? I had to kind of reinterpret those elements and just talk about it from a decolonial cultural lens.
Look, what does Lukutona mean? Look and you shall see. It puts me in mind of another rule of creativity, which is applicable to filmmaking, which is show, don't tell. you cut your teeth in filmmaking, scripting, directing, editing, although inexplicably never acting, which I always thought was a missed opportunity for you. Right? Look at this guy. What made you decide to write a novel? And did you find any differences or difficulties transferring the skills from script writing to prose?
So, interesting enough, yesterday I'm also a lecturer for AFTA. So I teach about short story and research studies, etc. So we were talking about the prose of adapting from novel to a feature or a play. And I think for me it was such a strange translation from screenplay into novelization, because there's a far more description within a novel than there is in a script. Obviously you have an action, then you have your dialogue, and that's about it. But in a book, it's like there's this whole different stance. There's this omnipresent view. You also have to decide what narrative you want to go through. Is it omnipresent? Is it first person? Is it third person? Is it through? I don't know. There's a whole different, multiple ways of telling a story. But for me, I think the idea of sitting and writing a book was terrifying. And I think a lot of my friends, predating Luke, so Lukutona was not influenced by him, just saying. But a lot of the people in my sort of periphery at that point, they had kind of said, dude, I feel like the lore is so dense that maybe you should write this as a novel. So I was like, okay. And in 2006, I had written a novelization version of Lukutona. It was terrible. It was probably the worst thing I've ever written in my entire life. I mean, I'm pretty sure this is pretty bad as well, but it's okay. But nothing compared to them. There was but I had given it to one of my friends, Teddy Japola, and his father was a novelist. And his dad had said, dude, the world, he kept going on about the world. He kept saying, the world, the lore, the characters, these are cool. That has potential. So when I worked on it in 2015, and finally came to 2018, one of my friends, who's sitting right here, she's in the back, also a great actress. She's in a film called Great Town Girl. Hopefully you will see it one day.
She's not listening.
I know she isn't. Sanam. Talking about you. Yeah, so she kind of, propelled me to write this as a novel. We're both fantasy fans, we're both Lord of the Rings fans. And I went in with the stance of being like, all right, Tolkien, bring the brown man. Brown man's coming. And yeah, from 2018, it went on. I started. And then in 2020, obviously, nobody was doing anything. And I decided, let me finish this bloody thing. So I finally got to the end. And I think the process, based on your question, is that there was such difficulties figuring out certain plot lines and how they match and how they sync together, because the book is kind of split in different arcs. So you start off with the humans in chapter 1, chapter 2 goes into the elves, Chapter 3 goes to the dwarves. Chapter 4 goes to the wizards. And then it's back to the elves again and their storyline. So it kind of does that. So you have to kind of remember some of the characters, some of the lore yourself as the author, which is quite tasking. So I can imagine what the reader can go through if they're reading the book. But in the end of the day, I found my ground, and I think, you know, the story, I think the story is sound at the moment, so I'm very proud.
I think we'll let the readers be the judges of that. I'm just teasing, bro. You've touched on some of this next question already, but I really want to edge in this cool quote from Ursula Le Guin, my favorite fantasy author of A Wizard of Earthsea. She said, "To make up a name of a person or a place is to open the way to the world and languages to which that name belongs. Those who write fantasy must play Adam. They need names for the characters, creatures, and places of their entire fictive world, of language, and how well they play it." I love this quote. I always keep it in mind when I'm creating characters of my own. Names and naming were a prominent idea in many of Le Guin's novels, and she often spoke about how important a part of the creative process it was. Now, the world of Lukutona is a fully realized universe, with many named characters and locations, as well as different languages for the various races you've created, including the dragons themselves. Again, you've spoken somewhat about this, but I'd like to know more about how did you go about naming your characters, your kingdoms, distinguishing them from one another, even creating their languages. I was a little disappointed Lukutona wasn't named after me, but maybe following from that, tell us a bit more. You've spoken about the elves as writhes and the dwarves. Tell us a little bit about how you named and distinguished these characters and maybe some of the kingdoms that are involved in your book.
So the characters and the naming of the cities and world itself. How do I say this politely? Bullshit. Absolute bullshit. Like
ChatGPT, did it?
No ChatGPT at that time. Doesn't exist. It was.
Sorry, for those of you who have the book in your hands, there's a beautifully illustrated map, which I had to refer to several times to figure out where the characters were going. But as every good fantasy book has, check out the map. And that's also where I looked at some of these names and I was like, that's some wild wordplay.
I just, for me, I think I've always been obsessed with language. I've always been obsessed with literature in itself. I think coming from a family of readers, even though I must confess, I don't read as often as I used to. But I think just in terms of phonetics, if you have sounding, we say, you understand where that comes from. There's a very specific idea on sounds for words. They come from different linguistic backgrounds, right? And here in South Africa, you can say Afrikaans, okay? Zulu. Xhosa. So, if you understand just the nature of that sound, you can make up any name, and it can sound cool. Tareas, Morka, Karana, Tarasina, Tunara. What does those sound like? Tunara sounds
Elvish.
It sounds Dwarvish. It sounds Muslim. It sounds Mughal, Turkish. Within the name, he just got it wrong. The guy who's asking me questions. Oh my God. But just on that concept of just language and sound, you can literally make a word sound similar. She comes from Dravidian background, but if you think about some of the nature of Dravids, they were also very similar to the Aboriginals. And there's a link between India and Australia already. And that's historical. So just from that culture, a character like Naril, she exists. Inara, she exists. He exists. Virnara, Lirana. Also, the thing about fantasy is a lot of the words sound the same. I mean, how many characters in Game of Thrones sound exactly verbatim to each other? Lord of the Rings, literally. It's like you have Isildur, you have Boromir, you have Aragorn, you have Thranduil, Legolas,
Lorana and Lorena.
Lorana and Lorena.
Those are from your book.
Aegon, Daemon, Varys. Varys. Come on, seriously? Are you complaining about Lorana and Lorena?
You wrote it.
Exactly. So that if you look at the nature of just those sounds, I think the most important thing about doing fantasy, if there are any sort of fantasy aficionados or upcoming novelists, always remember when you creating your names, have an understanding of where the sound comes from. Have an understanding of where that cultural influence comes from. Because then you have something to say.
The Bleeding Anchors, you've got a huge cast. You've got a lot of characters. You've got a lot of different races. And I find a lot, as a general thing in fantasy, I call them the chosen one characters. There's always characters who have destinies, who have part of prophecies. They're on a quest. But I'm always fascinated by the characters without destinies, the little characters, the characters who are just there existing in the world. Do you have a favorite character in your own book? One that you enjoyed writing the most, or maybe one that you relate to personally, or one that is just, you just dig? I've got my personal favorites, but I'm going to keep them to myself for now. Do you have a favorite character?
Well, it would be rude for me to not introduce them to you. Naril, would you please stand up, please? So, Naril Equivalaris is an elven warrior from the village, from the city of Tarusina. It is, if you look at the map on the book, quite respectable of what India looks like. And obviously, as an Indian elf, she is a stoic character who doesn't start. She starts off as a stoic character, but she ends up being somebody who is so profoundly sisterly, motherly, and a strong sense of femininity, where she ends up becoming one of, I think, my favorite character, because my favorite protagonist, because of what she represents, and what she maintains as her goal throughout the book. Alex, I think, bringing this character to life as well. We were at Icon, which is an event that happened at Westfall, where I sold a couple of books. And this young creative who put this costume together by herself, which is insane. She brought so much nuance and so much humanity already, and just seeing the character in person, how can I not say it's my favorite character? The other character, who also is here, the Woven. She's a mysterious character that we are introduced to in chapter 2. And what I would like to do is actually read the passage of her introduction to you on how Naril meets this very creature.
These are characters with destinies. These are chosen ones.
Whatever. Okay, so chapter 2, the creation. In the heart of the forest, amid the creatures and the symphony of insects, lay the majestic stronghold of Tarasina, an elvish homeland. The Emerald Palace sat perched atop a colossal lingam-shaped stone, offering a commanding view of the world below. Two tall and exquisitely graceful beings, their long legs eloquently navigating the primeval forest, guarded this haven. Black hair cascaded down their backs, their skin a rich blend of black and blue, shimmering in the dappled sunlight filtering through the trees. Elaborate blue stripes adorn their foreheads, unassuming beauty, their forms poised with an otherworldly elegance. With piercing eyes, alert pointed ears, and a heightened sense of smell, they were well suited for their roles as scouts. Among the elves stood a towering figure, muscular and bearded, his imposing physique accentuated by the quiver trapped to his back and the dhoti wrapped around his waist. Sorry. Need another drink, I guess. Beads adorned his wrist, a subtle contrast to his rugged appearance. He gently plucked a dewdrop from a leaf and brought it to his nose, inhaling deeply. As he turned to the female elven sculpt beside him, her striking features commanded attention. Grayish-green eyes, sharp nose, and perfect lips twitched in alarm, her expression mirroring the concern etched on his face. Her flowing hair cascaded down her back as she gazed out into the forest, her exquisite charm momentarily eclipsed by a sense of foreboding. The scent wafting from the single droplet seemed to hold a dark secret, its potency enough to unsettle even these skilled elves. Silently, they moved through the tall trees, each bearing a crossbow in their arms, coils of string and fabric wound around their limbs, extending from wrist to neck, and their breastplates gleamed with a silky aqua sheen. Their crossbows were double-bowed and crafted from polished oak. The female elf ears twitched, swiveling left and right as she directed her partner's attention to an injured deer, its body marred by black tar-like substance. They darted through the forest with grace, quickly reaching the injured creature. The male elf, his dark green eyes brimming with compassion, knelt beside the suffering deer. Its head rested against the forest floor. It whimpered, shuddering as the tar on its back seeped into its skin. The two elvish warriors observed the creature closely. The male elf gently placed his hand on its trembling form. His hand hesitated, hovering over the tar. Closing his eyes, he whispered an enchantment in a language as old as the forest itself. His words bathed the deer's body in an ethereal light. Radiant golden hues emanated from within, illuminating its ribcage, and wisps of golden smoke escaped from its nostrils. Gradually, the tar evaporated from his body. The male elf turned to glance behind them and discovered more traces of the tar, as if it had seeped from the deer's body, leading deeper into the hollow of the trees. They both rose to their feet, their attention briefly returning to the deer, which blinked up at them before swiftly bounding away. The elvish pair then turned their focus to the trail and followed it deeper into the woods. As they progressed, the forest lost some of its vibrancy. The once green surroundings gave way to dull hue. The natural sense dissipated. The elves emerged from the woods to find a scene of devastation. Burnt trees, ashy patches of land surrounding the area, and a woman, unclothed. And for other authors in the midst, and those who are not, I think the most important thing to know, especially if you're writing within fiction, is that always understand your world, always understand your characters, and do not write for a target market. Do not write for anybody else but yourself. I tell my students this all the time, and I say, the only audience is yourself. If you're sitting in a film and you're looking at this film and complaining about it, why are you complaining? Which means you have an idea for yourself. You have a concept driving within that's saying, hey, I can do this differently somehow. So if you have the know-how to do it, do it. Go out there and get it done. That is what my friend said to me about this book. And I got it done. And the thing is, maybe it's riddled with some mistakes here and there. There's always some refinements. It's fine. You're gonna know. You're gonna see it. You're gonna be like, why the hell did I buy this book? But at least the author was honest. Yes. But in the end of the day, guys, like, I really feel the most important thing to authors, especially up-and-coming authors, who really want to find, who don't understand what their writer's voice is. Listen to yourself. Listen to the story that was a form of inception in your mind, and then go with it. Because sometimes you'll find the story will take you places that you never expected. And I think that's the lasting impression I would like to leave to young upcoming authors.
As a peer, a colleague, and a fellow writer, I would also just like to reiterate on Dayakar's point about write for yourself. To paraphrase something David Bowie said in the 70s, as soon as an artist is doing work for a target market, they're doing their worst work. And he didn't use as many words, but he was talking about fan service. Fan service is the worst thing to happen to creativity. Don't write for other people. Don't create art for other people. Do it for yourself. And the people will come to you. The audience you need, the audience that will appreciate your work, will appreciate your work. Whether you are in the sphere of literature or film or comic books or whatever, write for you. I think that's basically concludes it. We can open up for any questions from the floor, if you like. Anybody want to ask the author anything?
Last point you made. The last point you made was that you should target people to sell your ideas. But unfortunately, we live in a very different world where economics and finances play a very important role. How do you divorce yourself from that kind of attitude to say, look, I'm doing it for myself, but you still want to make some money, and that's the money?
Would you mind if I take this one as well? But first, I hear exactly what you're saying. So I do think there's a. I love the medium of comic books. I hate the industry of comic books. You understand there's two sides to every creative coin, you know. No matter what you're in, there's the medium, there's the craft, and there's the industry. And the industry is what you're talking about. It's the marketing, it's the money, it's how we make a living out of the thing we love. And unfortunately, the industry is often the monster that eats the craft. So it is a tricky balance to strike, and realistically what you're saying is true. One does need to accommodate those things, but I'm trained as a graphic designer. I could walk into a graphic design house and earn a lot more money than I am earning in my day job, but I love my day job. I get to work at home, I get to draw comic books, and I get to make enough money to pay the rent and buy the beer. It's not a lot of money, but it's enough for that. And I'm happy. If I worked at Derivco, I wouldn't be happy, or something, you know what I mean? So I think it's about striking the balance. Like Mr. Miyagi says, life is balance.
Belay that nonsense.
Company man here.
I think, you know, it's a very good question, but I think the most important thing is, and I say this again, as I reiterate this to my students, if you go in with the mindset that I'm making a film to sell, then you're walking into a trap. If you go in with the mindset saying, I have a concept that I think is cool, I would read it, I would watch it, then you have a right mindset. Because that means you have an audience. If you like it, others would too. There's nobody with the same mindset, but there are people with the same interests. And I think that's the most important thing, is when you go in with the inclination to make something good, the intentions to make something good, then you have something that will sell. Because nobody wants to make something bad, unless you're like a Tommy Wiseau or like a, I don't know, you know, Tommy Wiseau to people who don't know much about film culture. He made a film called The Room, which was considered to be the best movie ever made. And this man was like a strange European that snuck into America and suddenly had funds to make a film, and he had never had the experience to make a film, but he still found an audience. And that in itself tells you that the subjectivity of art is well renowned. And that is the point. I think going in, oh yeah, I'm gonna make this movie, I'm gonna make so much money, blah blah blah. I got news for you, bro. It's not gonna happen. But if you're saying, I'm trying, I'm doing my best, I'm gonna try and get this thing done, but I think it's cool, then, like, unfortunately, in the nature of film today, we are so struggled by, or throttled by so much content, too much content, and it's oversaturated, and we can never ever get a chance to see which is good and which is bad. Sometimes there are the golden nuggets that come out, like a film like Sinners, or a film like Weapons, or you know, I don't know what else is popular these days, but that can come out and become a pop culture phenomenon, and people are talking about it, and those are original IPs, not on the basis of some sequel, not on the basis of some franchise, not on this corporate schemed nature of filmmaking that is now Netflix has been obsessed with, Amazon has been obsessed with, almost every streaming service imaginable is obsessed with. But when you look at things like A24, you look at things like Neon, and they're giving some really brilliant original films, cinema, pure absolute art. And sometimes they get seen, sometimes they don't. But in the nature of the good interest of the writer and the director, they went out there, they got it done. And who cares if you don't sell? How many films did David Lynch say were $1 billion? Not many. But he's now one of the greatest directors of all time.
Well, he's dead, but yeah.
He's a legend. So therefore, all legends die, right? But there we go. That's my point. And point taken.
Anyone else?
Because what you are touching on is authenticity, and with the oversaturation in the markets and the franchises that Netflix is just pumping out based on an algorithm, I think people connect with authenticity. And when you write for kind of a general mass of people, or when you make a film for a general mass of people, what ends up happening is you end up writing for no one. And I think I see the tides turning now in film as well, where people once again are realizing this, and they're going, why do we keep getting the same things over and over again? And that's why when you see films like Sinners and the stuff that A24 has been producing for years, it's like, wow, this is something original and people are connecting with it. And it's those kind of stories that are growing again. So, yeah. And I just think that was a really good point.
Hi. So my question would be, like, as a writer, how do you stop yourself from getting really in the weeds with the technicality of how your story is flowing? Like, how many times did I say said, and like keeping track of your conversations and your dialogue between characters, making sure it's...
For the first time ever, I'm sitting down and I'm able to hold the book in my hand and read it. And yeah, this is an editing situation. Anyway.
The find and replace words, sir.
You know what? I urge everybody, right? You may get drunk by the end of this book, but it's a drinking game.
Drink every time.
Drink every time. Drink every time you see themselves with a capital E. Finally. And said. And yeah, if you find any other mistakes, also drink. But I'm not encouraging anybody to drink like right now. I'm just saying. But enough. So my friend, so my friend in the back there, she actually said, "Bro, just lead it into it." Like, if anybody picks it up and says themselves with capital E, I was like, yeah, that was intentional. So intentional.
What he did was, he clearly did it.
Like, this is my second print run. I have now sold just, I think about 150 books. Yes, one or two from internationals. But I think in terms of authenticity, I think Alex, you said this the best. Sorry, not real. She had said, you can very much tell that this book is written by a human, even with the mistakes. Like, too late now, but still, I do wear it proud. I wear it here, saying to you guys all, yeah, there are mistakes in this book, but in the end of the day, who can say that they wrote a book and finished it? I think authenticity is one of the most important things, and Sanam said it. And if you have a voice and you have something to say within your story, regardless of mistakes, if people see the story, if people see the vibes, if people catch on to those characters, I think I've done my job.
And also authenticity is messy, conversation is messy, messy. If I may, I just want to add to that. Authenticity is messy. Human beings are messy. Conversation is messy. No one is perfect. There are mistakes, but it doesn't matter. It adds to the narrative. It adds to how you connect. It's more human. It's more human than human. There needs to be mistakes. If you program drums and they all on beat, it's not going to sound authentic. It's not going to sound real. So it's important to have a voice. I think to be honest with yourself and to convey what you're saying with all the mistakes and to wear it like you say. Because at the end of the day, that's what I've got from a lot. I'm only 6 chapters in. But a lot of what you write and felt so authentic to me because it felt so familiar. And that's what I'm really enjoying about it is that authenticity and that
6 chapters in, how many mistakes he's found.
I mean, the things elves was one that actually confused me for a while, but I was sitting on the beach, and it was tough. But like that.
Don't worry, the second edition will be better.
It would be the first one.
I just wanted to ask about transitioning between like film, which is the script, which is very like finite, and you've got so much time and you've got so much you can say, and a book which is like a whole world creation, and you're talking about like prequels and sequels and branch side stories, and it's a much bigger universe. So I think a lot of creative people, like I do music, I've done short stories, but let's say you want, that transition from one to the other. Like, what were the differences you found, or how do you have to change mindsets if you're going from, let's say, comic book to full novel, or from music to writing, or from writing a novel to writing lyrics for music? We see like this scope the scope changes all the time. So how do you like wrap your mindsets around that, just for creatives in the room that want to like change or try different genres?
Okay, cool. I'll answer the question with regards to film to novel. Luke can take the ropes in terms of comics. Film is a completely different animal in itself. I started doing a film called The Forbidden in 2013 for my final year campus, and my dad and I understand the struggles that we went through for that film, and I think just in the nature of growing up as a filmmaker, getting into novelization, getting into some form of writing for a long form literary medium, it was confusing. It was really intense. At the end of the day, I think coming from film was interesting because the descriptions of ensuring that the people can be within that world is a highly visual thing. It's a highly audio-visual thing. So that translation, sure, it's going to be confusing at first. But I think if you understand that nature from a filmmaker turned novelist, then it kind of starts making sense. And I think even with me reading it, understanding the concept of separating myself as the guy who wrote the book, but also as, this is a filmmaker who became a novelist. Then you start understanding certain ways that the book in itself, as a writing style, kind of works. Because if just by buying the book, it's going to help me fund an audiobook. The idea is that because obviously I come from film, I have a number of insanely talented actors and vocalists and musicians who I would love to ensure that they have work, they get paid, and they're able to share their talent to the world of Lukutona. I grew up listening. So, my family and I went to England. We bought this cassette for the Hot, and it was done by BBC. And it was actually, the narrator was Stephen Fry. And but everything else about that BBC production of The Hobbit was cinematic. And this is just an audiobook. There was score. There was vocalists who were giving a performance that was resounding and epic and just immersive, and I could just picture Bilbo, the dwarven kin, Thorin Oakenshield, Gandalf, all on this journey, and something about it was just it stood out compared to other audiobooks that I've listened to. Most audiobooks are just the narrator. It's just this guy reading blatantly and boring. Like, you want to be able to be immersed into something. You want to feel a sense of scale, even just by audio itself. Why do we think we call it audio visual? Because it's the audio first, then we understand the visual. Right? Exactly. And for me, I think, I'm also like, I also have a musical influence. I've played piano since I was a kid. A lot of my family have musical talent. But for me, I've always been obsessed with film scores, film music, and I've written a demo album for the audiobook. And I have two individuals, Shannon Newton and Gary Nix, Gary Nix is from the Kickstands, if anybody knows. And they are going to be helping me do a song for the book.
Skies torn by man, forgone are those who now are banned. Beyond our homes, fire birthed a man, a soulless man without name and